Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the first in our best practice series relating to the development and implementation of technology-enabled care and support models. This first session will be focusing on transforming complex care services with technology, and it's wonderful to see so many attendees with us today. And it's a really good cross-section as well from different areas of adult social care, health and housing, so that's really, really good to see. I wholeheartedly believe that this is going to be a really good use of your hour and a half this morning. We've got a really packed agenda, and really what we're hoping that you'll get out of it is we all recognise that building better services in today's climate is a really difficult thing to do, and we're hoping that today will inspire you with the confidence and the feeling that it's possible, that maybe you will be able to gain from our learning and our experiences of things to do, and maybe some things as well, not what to do, what not to do. Okay, that was easy for me. We also want to inspire the importance of continuing to transform services in today's climate, even though it isn't easy, and even though funding is more difficult, and all the other things that we know are happening in the setting. Perhaps also we will inspire a bit of bravery around taking some positive risks, because actually when you see the outcomes from some of our sessions today, I think it will demonstrate that it's worth taking those risks. And really the most important thing that we want to really impart today is the ability to reduce restrictions for people, the ability to create models where people are living the lives of their choosing, that they've got more autonomy at home, and that their lives are improved, their well-being's improved, and they're living happy lives in the settings that they should be in. So that's really the focus of today's session. We have an array of wonderful guests today. We have Digital Care Hub's Katie Thorne, if you want to give us a wave, Katie. And she's going to start us off with a short intro to the work that they're doing at the moment around technology being introduced into learning disability settings. And she's also going to give us some information about some great research that was commissioned last year, asking people who draw on care and support services about their data and how that's used. So that'll be a really interesting thing to hear. We're then going to hear an amazing story from everyone at Nottinghamshire County Council. So we've got Anne Tebbs, we've got Mark Douglas, if you want to give us a wave, and Lifeway's Katie Butlin as well. Hi, Katie. And they will be talking about how they've supported 5 people out of, in some cases, very long-term hospital placements and into their own homes in the community. They use technology to drive a less restrictive model for this. So it will be a really, really good session. And then finally, we have Julie McKinnon. If you want to give us a wave, Julie. Can we see Julie? And she's going to be joining us for our panel discussion at the end, where we're going to tackle some of the key themes around the challenges of implementing technology into your services and into your processes. Julie spent the last 13 years working within Cornwall Partnership NHS Foundation Trust, the last year of which she's been focusing on and developing their virtual ward offer for admissions avoidance. So she's been looking at step up and step down referrals. And as operations lead, Julie is now expanding that digital offer. So she's looking at companion and activity monitoring centres to complement their direct support offer delivered by volunteers and by paid carers. So I know from that lineup, you're going to be as impressed as I've been with all the stories and the experience that they have to share with you today. You are likely to have questions as you go, and if you do, you can drop them in the chat. We'll try to pick them up linked to each person as they go if it's relevant directly to them, but it might be that we hold some back for the last panel discussion because we think it's a good question to ask everybody across the board. We are recording today's session, so anyone who couldn't make it, you can share it with your colleagues, and if you want to have a second watch, then you can do afterwards. We'll be sharing it out with you. Just before we start, I'm going to give you a quick overview of Just Roaming, just for context in the session later on, so you can understand what we're talking about. Just Roaming was developed as a fully customizable live monitoring and alert system. And the idea behind it is that it will enable adults living with learning disabilities, autism, complex needs, mental health conditions to live more independently and safely at home in supported living services. It uses a combination of sensors, so heat, light, sound, motion, door sensors, that kind of thing, weight sensors, combined with more traditional telecare, telehealth sensors can be brought into the picture as well if they're being used and used well. And they're installed around a person's property and sequenced together in order to inform a roaming team of support staff when somebody requires their support. They do this through a mobile phone app, and everything's prioritised and RAG rated based on priority level. The system does also connect with smart home controls, and that helps with safe management of the home environment. It means that staff are able to step outside of the home environment as the person wants them to, and as they are required to, and as they need to make, and they can still monitor the situation, and they can make sure the person's safe until they need to return. We also pull into the system ways and means for the person to actively call for staff if they need to. But the idea behind the system is that the majority of time it's passively operating in the background. Deliberately so, and sometimes contentiously so, there is no audio or video feed. And this is worked around the principles of least restrictive practice. We believe that there are less restrictive ways of capturing events, and we do that through the sophistication of the triggers and the alerting. There's a dashboard for managers, and that continually audits the service. And it will provide managers and teams with critical usage data, but also information around support. Perhaps there's been increases in support requirements or support intensity, that kind of thing. And we can view trends and patterns on the dashboard. Also, part of the service, because it is a service offering rather than purchasing, a piece of hardware, for example, we believe that the reporting needs to be fully customizable as well. And that is so that professional teams can understand the information that it's providing. And it's been used in lots of different ways. It's used to reassure families, it's used to hand over to other staff members, it's used by managers and commissioners when planning care services to review patterns and trends and make sure that they're adjusting support in line with need. Our mission with Just Roaming and throughout Just Checking really is to deliver better care through thoughtful use of technology. And to help this happen, we make sure that all of our team working with Just Roaming are care experienced, and that therefore we can see ourselves as kind of the role of a care partner rather than a tech supplier, for example. We know that we need to continually drive usage to make things work. So for us, that means proactive daily support, monitoring for trends, pointing to anomalies, and being available 24/7 for that technical assistance if it's ever required at 3 a.m, for example. If you need to rely on the system, we need to be reliable, so we need to make sure that we're there. For technology to really affect change, we believe that people supplying technology need to be involved in the aims and the outcomes that it's delivering. So this is an important part of the work that we do as well. And I think that's how teams really are able to build technology-enabled support models, that we're taking away the pain of supplying and using the technology, hopefully, as much as we can. And then teams are able to focus on delivering the outcomes for the people that they're supporting. I think most importantly for us, it's about enabling staff to afford people the time and space that they need to decompress at home, do the things they want to at home, to feel in control of their own space, and just have that privacy that's everyone's right in their own home to have. So that's a quick summary of Just Roaming and the context of that for the session later with Knots. We're going to move very swiftly on to Katie. Katie Thorne is going to kick us off talking through the work that Digital Care Hub has been doing recently. Katie's been the part of this since their founding in January 2019, and has been instrumental in some of the really transformative work we've seen in adult social care across the digital landscape. Katie's been involved in many programs, but digital social care records is probably a big highlight. better security, better care, and more recently, the work with Oxford University Institute for Ethics around generative AI. So if you've got any questions about any of that work, I'm sure Katie will be pleased to answer them. There's some guidance and a charter coming up soon that will be really interesting to look for. Katie's work involves making sure that digital innovations are used ethically and they're used effectively. So it's really exciting to have her here today. Over to you, Katie.
Thanks, Amy, and thanks for that really lovely introduction. It's always nice to hear. So hi, good morning, everybody. It's great to be here today. As Amy said, I work for an organisation called Digital Care Hub. If you've not heard of us before, we're a social care sector-led organisation and provide free support to adult social care providers across England on technology, data protection and cybersecurity. And we sort of do that across a bunch of different programs. I'm going to talk about 2 of them specifically today. But before I get into that, I sort of was asked to do a bit of a broad overview about digitisation in the adult social care sector, particularly with a care provider focus and sort of where we are now. I'm sure everybody on this call is really aware that we've seen mass adoption of technology really driven since 2020, 2021. COVID played a large part in that. But also we did see sort of for the first time a lot of funding coming into the sector to support digitisation. So NHS England's Digitising Social Care programme had the Digital Transformation Fund to support with first-year costs with the adoption of digital social care records. And that programme, as Amy has mentioned, has been really successful. There was about 40% of the CQC registered providers were using a digital care record in 2021. And now it's well over 70% of the sector, and NHS England believe they're on target for that to reach 80% by March of 2025, which is a huge leap forward given the size of the sector. We've also seen quite a lot of funding through other organisations. So, for example, the Health Foundation had the Tech for Better Care Fund, where they were funding programmes to do with assistive technology and evaluating those programmes. And we should see sort of some outputs from that this year as well. So it has been quite exciting. We've seen a lot of innovation in this space. Thinking quite specifically sort of about assistive technology and technology-enabled care, I just wanted to touch briefly on the report which TSA released in March of this year, where they did their first State of the Sector report on the use of technology-enabled care. And in that report, I think it was sort of a really positive thing. It said that 97% of all DASs really agree that technology-enabled care is vital to respond to the tidal wave of demand and complexity, and that the case really had been made for some of the benefits of using assistive technology. And I know some of our other speakers today are really going to go into the details of that and very excited to hear what they're going to be saying as well. However, this report did also say that 80% of senior leaders in local authorities said that building the business case for investment still remains a challenge. And over half of councils still believe that there is little to no understanding of technology-enabled care across the health and social care system. So hearing more about sort of the real practical realities of what implementation looks like, as we're going to be hearing today, I think hopefully can take some steps to addressing some of those concerns. But onto the work that we have been doing quite specifically. So we, as I've mentioned, provide guidance for care providers on adopting technology. So that might look like things, what you need to make sure you have in your contracts, how to identify the stakeholders you should be engaging with implementation, how to bring staff along on your journey, how to have conversations with people who are being supported and their carers and loved ones about tech. But when we talk specifically to LD and autism providers and working age adult services, they really felt that a lot of the guidance was really focused more on sort of older person's care, and had some requests for guidance specifically for LD services. So we've decided that we're going to take this forward and be working on it for the rest of this financial year. Based on conversations with providers, they sort of highlighted 4 particular areas, which are on the screen. I'll read them in a moment. But this is still very much in sort of a discovery development phase. So if you kind of think any of these have already been done, we don't want to recreate the wheels. So would love to know about that. Or if there are any other areas that you think would be really useful, please do let me know. So the suggestions, that we've heard so far is that people would really like more guidance on how to undertake personalised assessments about what technology is most appropriate for the people we support. Recognising there's always a challenge between sort of the financial benefits of doing bulk procurement for technology, as opposed to the really individualised needs that certain people may have, and some guidance about how to navigate that boundary. We also hear quite often from LD and autism services providers that they struggle to understand what key performance indicators they should have, what outcomes they should be measuring, so that they can consistently review and monitor how technology is performing in their services and if it's doing what they want it to achieve, not just in the short term, but also in the longer term. Another area that we've been asked for support on, and we get funding questions constantly, I'm sure all of you on the call are familiar with that as well, but is specifically around how to support people with learning disabilities to access funding to adopt technology themselves, potentially through things like the Access to Work scheme or other opportunities to support people with accessing devices and to mitigate digital exclusion. And the final area that we've been asked to look at is really around how we can support working age adults to develop digital skills for joining the workforce. There's been quite a lot of research that many people with learning disabilities would like to be in work, but don't feel able to do so. And so it's the thinking is that supporting people with access to digital skills training may be one way of helping them to achieve their goals of joining the workforce, if that's something that they would like to do. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, that work is just starting. If you'd like more information, really happy to talk to you about it. And then this is a piece of research that we commissioned in 2022. So as part of our Better Security, Better Care programme, where we provide help to care providers to complete the Data Security and Protection Toolkit and to improve their information governance requirements. We also look at the broader landscape within adult social care around data protection and cybersecurity. And so we commissioned Liverpool Social Care Partnership to do some work with people who use care and support services about what their understandings were on how their data is being used. In this research, we found that the majority of older adults didn't feel comfortable that they really understood how either their financial or health and care information is being used, and didn't feel that that was a conversation that was had with them. Results were slightly better for working age adults with learning disabilities and their carers, but still very much the focus was really about how their financial information was used and the potential for financial fraud. And they really didn't feel comfortable or confident that they understood how health and care information was being used. So off the back of this, we produced a report which is available. You can use the QR code on the screen, or I'll also happily drop a link to that in the chat. It's also available in an easy read version, but it provides advice about how you can go about having conversations with people about what their data is being used for and why that's important. Advice around developing easy read guides for privacy notices, for example, and really making sure that we're having a conversation across all parties about what we're doing with technology. So that's it from me. Thank you very much for listening, and yeah, really happy to do questions or to respond in the chat.
Thanks, Katie, that's perfect. And you should be able to use that QR code there to link to that document that Katie mentioned if you want to use it to support your conversations with people. We do have a question. It's in relation to monitoring and review of outcomes, Katie. And it says, is this to be based on improving quality of life, which in my opinion are the key performance indicators, and my opinion.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. So that is sort of where we think the focus is going to be. I'm kind of hesitant to say definitely yes at the moment, just because we haven't started our actual working groups with providers and people who use services. So I don't want to predict what they're going to say, but based on early conversations, that's really going to be the core focus. So really thinking about outcomes for individuals as opposed to sort of wider systems or organizational cost savings is where we're thinking it's going to go.
Yeah, perfect. That makes perfect sense. Just to make the comment that I said the chat function earlier, which actually to say what I should have said, the Q&A section. So if you've got questions to ask Katie or anyone as we go throughout the session, please just pop them in the Q&A section. And Katie's just dropped the link. Okay, bro. Okay, I think we're going to move. Oh, hang on. Let me just wait 1 second. I think we're good. I think we're going to move over now. Thank you very much, Katie. Katie will be back in our panel discussion later, and will be contributing to all of our thoughts around the challenges and how to implement good models of care. So see you in a bit, Katie. Thank you. And I'm going to welcome now the team from Nottinghamshire County Council and Lifeways, hi everyone, who back in September 23 opened their doors to brand new, you can see some examples here, purpose-built developments of bungalows with the aim of supporting people out of long-term hospital stays, as I said earlier. They're going to be talking you through the development process, how they built that technology-enabled model of care, and they'll be talking about how it was fundamentally founded on the principles of positive behaviour support. So really looking forward to this session. And Anne, we're going to start with you.
Morning everybody, I'm Anne Tebbs. I'm Senior Commissioning Officer at Nottinghamshire County Council, and I had the utter privilege for being involved in the last leg. Lots of better women than me were involved before, but the last leg of commissioning the Willows in Nottinghamshire, which, as Amy just mentioned, is 5 bungalows in Nottinghamshire that support people who have a learning disability or an autism diagnosis who've been in long stay hospital. We were fortunate enough to have some NHS England capital funding to develop these bungalows, and they were quite well thought through. We partnered with a housing provider who thought about the design of the property, thinking about kind of the bespoke needs of the individuals that were going to move there. We have features like anti-ligature taps, fittings, flush light fittings. We have sensory lighting for people in the spaces, and also a separate staff hub area where the care staff are based. So that's a little bit about the actual building. If we can move to the next slide. Thank you. So what really underpinned the Willows in terms of the support approach was the positive behavioural support principles. It was really important to us to appoint a provider who could really think about positive behavioural support. And if, for those of you who are less familiar with the concept, I'm sure we all are now, thinking about positive behavioural support being about improving the quality of people's lives, it assumes that our behaviour is a communication, and that actually we're communicating sometimes with our distress behaviour or challenge behaviour, an unmet need. And the point of PBS is to analyse those behaviours and really understand the function of them and do that functional based assessment of behaviour to really try to avoid those behaviours becoming apparent or needing to surface because people's needs are met proactively. That's a very basic outline of PBS. But if you want to know more, the Build website has got lots of really good information, and there's a great YouTube video about PBS. So we really thought about that in the tendering for the care and support. We wanted to make sure that there was a qualified positive behavioural support practitioner who could undertake functional assessments based at the Willows at least 2.5 days a week. We didn't want that person kind of nationally spread or even spread across the region. We really wanted that person to be embedded into the service to help staff understand some of the behaviours that they might experience working with the people that they are working with. So that's been hugely successful and really important when we think about how we use the technology to give us that information about data and behaviour and that sort of thing. So we really focused on a culture of improving the quality of life and thinking about positive risk taking. It was really important to us to work with a provider who understood that our fundamental aim here was to reduce restrictions. Some of the people that moved into the tenancies at the Willows have been in hospital for over 10 years, and it was really, really important to us to make sure that when they came into the community after being in hospital for such a long time, that their quality of life would increase and their restrictions would be able to be reduced. Many of those people were monitored 24 hours a day. Some of them were monitored through CCTV, so very restricted in hospital, and really wanted to think about how we could change that dynamic in the community, do what social care does best, I guess. Yeah, so we had very intensive staff inductions. Katie will vouch for that. Staff were really trained, I guess, in the unique needs of each of the individuals. So we really thought about the new staff coming into the service and the kinds of skills that they would need. There are people in the service, in the tenancies, with very specific kind of diagnoses, and we wanted to make sure that staff had as much understanding of that as possible, but also understand the person, their personal journey, the traumas that they may have faced in their inpatient settings or in their family homes previously, to really have that resilience and empathy, I guess, for what people have been through before they move here. Okay, let's have a look at the next slide, please. Oh, it's not me anymore. I'm going to hand over to Mark.
Morning, everyone. So I'm Mark Douglas. I'm the Technology Enabled Care Manager in the Social Care Department at Nottinghamshire County Council. So I'm just going to say a little bit around some general information around kind of attitudes and approaches to risk, which does cross over very quite a lot with the PBS approach that Anne has already talked about. So I think just to talk more generally rather than about the Willows specifically, like just framing is primarily a system which is around managing and assessing risks, and the assessment of risk is really key to the successful setting up of supported living services. We all know from our health and safety training, whether we've done that as part of social care or as part of general health and safety, that the formula for risk assessments is severity times by likelihood. But the reality is that within that, we do bring our own personal judgments, our own personal experiences around risk, which then guide the scoring that we give to a risk assessment. So we're looking at for people with complex needs in a residential care or a supported living setting, the consequences of that risk assessment are potentially going to be very significant. But as I said, we bring our own judgments to that. So what we find from our kind of limited perspective in technology enabled care is that we see very significant variations in analysis of risk. So a common example that we see is that we're be asked to look at solutions to manage risk for people with epilepsy. So professionals, families, for example, may say that a person has nighttime epilepsy and therefore the person needs to have as a mitigation to that risk, frequent nightly checks or even sometimes continual one-to-one supervision to manage that risk. So one of the first things I say about is that sometimes what we find out if we kind of delve a little bit deeper into that, so well, when did that person last have a seizure? Actually, what we then discover is that it's been 2, 3, 5, 10 years in one case that I can think of since that person has actually had a seizure. And one of the things we often raise at that point as well, the government says if somebody's been seizure free for more than 12 months, then you're able to drive a large metal can around on the roads, and it's considered legally safe for someone to do that. So therefore that does raise a question about are we doing a sensible, objective assessment of the risk if someone has epilepsy? So I just want to raise that general point that obviously there's a lot of subjectivity in risk assessments, and that can have a very significant impact on the level of restrictions that we then put in for people in supported living through having very high levels sometimes of staff supervision. I've chosen a lovely nice example there. I mean, that's quite a simple example, I guess, with managing risks that might manifest as a result of epilepsy. Of course, things are much more tricky if we're starting to look at more severe risks and where there is strong evidence of likelihood. So, for example, people that may self-harm. And understandably, you know, the consequences of self-harming potentially can be very, very severe. So it's understandable that sometimes our staff, other staff, professionals, family, begin to look at saying, well, actually, in order to adequately mitigate that risk, we are going to have to look at things like CCTV, which Anne mentioned was used for some of the people that have moved into the Willows in their previous hospital setting, or people having very high levels of one-to-one staffing, rather than potentially looking at how you might use a technology-enabled care solution to provide less restrictive risk support. One of the, I mean, Anne kind of alluded to this, but obviously one of the things as well, what are the risks of not using tech? Well, and if we continue to manage people's behavioural risks using the same methods that we've used historically for that individual, but they're still demonstrating, you know, challenging behaviours, then the likelihood is that you know, that behaviour is going to continue to take place. So the actual solution that we're putting in place sometimes is contributing to the very thing that we're trying to manage by putting that additional or continual one-to-one supervision and support in place. And that's where tech and systems like Just Roaming begin to come into play. So I think one of the key things for that is to thoroughly, and again, this is, you know, kind of crossing over with PBS, but it's thoroughly analysing, you know, the risk and the trigger behaviours for individuals, so that you can begin to look at, well, how can you manage, how can you deploy a technology-enabled care solution to mitigate or minimise those risks. So I think I've referred here on the slide to a hierarchy of tech interventions. So, for example, if we have someone who self-harms, we need to understand the circumstances under which that behaviour may manifest itself. So, for example, and we might say, well, okay, let's put some tech into to manage that. So we could say, well, if someone gets up in the night, we know from their previous history that often that leads to a self-harm incident. So, and this is where we get into this kind of hierarchy of tech interventions, because we could say, well, okay, someone gets out of bed, you know, there's a correlation between them being up during the night and them self-harming. So let's put a bed leaving alarm in, because we know then at the moment that they get out of bed that potentially, you know, they're going to go on and engage in that risk behavior. But if we thoroughly analysed what's happened for that individual, then it may be that we know, well, actually, that person's only going to self-harm if they go into a particular area in their home. So it might be that they go into the kitchen, they get a utensil that's in a utensil drawer in the kitchen, and that actually is the risk point. So we don't want to be potentially using something like a bed leaving alarm, because actually that's preventing that person from having the autonomy to do other things in their own home, to go into the living room and put the telly on at 2 o'clock in the morning. If they want to do that, that's absolutely fine. It is not a risk behavior. Our focus is on the drawer in the utensil drawer in the kitchen. So that's the bit that we need to monitor by tech. So again, that's quite a simple explanation, but it's just showing that by making more nuanced decisions about what we manage, thoroughly understanding and analysing what the risks and trigger points are, we can then begin to deploy tech interventions which are proportionate to the risk, and also, really importantly, obviously less restrictive, and enable that individual to enjoy the rest of their own home as they see fit. So I mentioned, you know, I've obviously mentioned quite a lot there around trigger behaviours, and that's one of the areas where I think Just Roaming starts to come into its own, because obviously, as well as potentially monitoring some of those risks or triggers, it's collecting general background information about that person's movements, about the interactions with staff. And that means that over time, by working with Just Roaming, and they obviously work with us and with the staff at the Willows, they're able to identify patterns of behaviour which have preceded behaviours that may be of concern that we want to try and manage more effectively. So that might be, for example, noticing from the data that somebody's been particularly inactive prior to a self-harm incident. Or it might be that the system shows that the night prior to a self-harm instance, there's been a pattern of the person not sleeping very well. And then that can feed into the PBS approach and help to manage and mitigate the risks going forward. I've put on here about training and support. I think Amy probably covered that at the beginning, but again, just to reiterate that we're just roaming you're buying a service. We're not buying some tech equipment here. We're working with a service delivery partner who importantly understands this area, this sector, people with autism, people with learning disabilities. Sometimes when we work with companies, we tend to have conversations with people that are more from a kind of sales rep point of view. That's not the experience that we've had with just checking or just roaming. Specifically, the people understand the issues and will work alongside us to analyse and interpret the data, and importantly support the staff at the Willows in making the best use of the system. Next slide, please. So a bit more specifics around the Willows. So the first tenant, as it says there, moved in September last year. One of the dilemmas we get as a team with new builds is quite often staff will come to us and say, we're going to have 5 people moving into 5 bungalows at this wonderful new scheme. Can you whack some tech in for us, which is great. It's really good that people think about technology enabled care, but our next question is, well, who's moving in? What are the issues? What are the risks? What are the support needs for those individuals? So that's very much been the approach at the Willows. When Anne first contacted me and said, can we talk about technology enabled care there? It was very clear. She was very clear at getting the message across to me that we want to do something that's really bespoke, really different, that's going to make a real difference to the lives of the people that are moving in here. And that kind of led us really to just roaming, because it's much more of a bespoke solution, and we knew that just roaming would work alongside us to come up with the solutions, and also very importantly work with Lifeways as a support provider to ensure the system was being used effectively to meet the needs of the people that live at this service. So another really important thing, and as an example of how just roaming worked with you, they came along, they got involved in meetings to talk about the individuals there, to talk about the risks and issues for those individuals and how we could deploy tech, as I said, sort of using this hierarchy of tech principle in the least restrictive way. So we're maximising the autonomy and the freedom for the people that are living there, whilst at the same time, focusing on the risks. Don't necessarily get that right straight away. So, just roaming are there to help us to review that, and obviously for us and the support provider in particular to give information the other way to say, look, this isn't quite right, what can we do to amend it? And as Amy has outlined, just roaming are very responsive to those sorts of requests. Tech was installed in a day. Obviously we want to minimize the disruption to the people there. This is a registered project. So supported living, there'll still be court protection requirements there as well. So we have got people living at this service, not everyone, but some of the people who live at this service are assessed as lacking mental capacity, and therefore obviously we have done appropriate mental capacity assessments under DOLS and best interest decisions. So I think the other thing just to add to that is the importance of the management information. Hopefully I gave you a bit of an example on the previous slide of how that management information can inform the continual reassessment of whether we are meeting people's needs. And because it is there in the background, gathering some information, often which we're not going to get any other way through that kind of activity monitoring side of things with just roaming, it helps us sometimes to identify risk behaviours or triggers that wouldn't be identified through observation by staff. Next slide, please. So in terms of outcomes, I think you're going to be seeing a video in a bit, so I'll let that talk for itself. I think, but the headlines are, Anne and Lifeway's ambitions for this service to enable people to be more independent. And again, I must stress, having met some of the people here and heard them talk about their experiences when they were in hospital, it's tear-inducing, to be honest. It literally made me cry when I've heard some of the stories for some of the people here about how they feel their lives have been transformed from how they were previously living in a hospital setting. So that, in practice, that has meant we've been able to withdraw some of the one-to-one support, both during the day and at night. You'll see on the video someone talking quite specifically about being given a bit more freedom and autonomy for a few hours a day. And people are, they're seeing it as their home. You've got some lovely pictures here of one of the people that lives at the service, who you'll hear from shortly. Who's just having a quality of life that is unimaginable from what was previously the situation for them. So we have, obviously we have reduced restrictions. I am going to mention the S word. We have across health and social care, because the packages of care here are jointly commissioned across health and social care. We've saved the equivalent, full year equivalent of £479,000 in care costs. So that's a net figure after we've deducted the cost of providing the just roaming system. So we have ended up with the win-win situation here. We've improved the lives of the people that are living here, but in the current financial climate, we've also been able to save some money, and the system, provides us with the evidence to make those decisions, and that's really important. We obviously need to be able to evidence that it's appropriate for us to withdraw some of the one-to-one support that's previously been provided. That's me done, I think. So I'll be passing you over now to Katie.
Hello, my name's Katie. So I'm a manager at the Willows. So I've had the privilege of sort of being involved right from when we opened back in September 2023. And we welcomed the first people sort of moving in, and we did that sort of a staged approach from September. Yep, so just to sort of explain some of the outcomes and go into further detail, looking at sort of specifics in regard to the people that we support. So a good night's sleep, I think, is probably something that we all can take for granted, and it's something that's so important for the people that we support. I think we were quite lucky for tenant, the first tenant that I'm going to refer to, we were quite lucky. This person moved in the February 2024, so that was around the time that just roaming was installed, and like we said, it was installed in a day. It was done very quickly, which was really important to the people that were supporting. But this particular tenant, one of the first things she said to me was, am I going to be disturbed at night? Like, it was really, really important. And like back in the hospital setting, it would have been based on those individual like high risk needs in terms of like physical health sort of concerns. In terms of this person's diagnosis, that would have been 15-minute checks, 30-minute checks that quite obviously affected their sleep, affected their well-being. You could see that sort of throughout the transition period. So regular welfare checks were needed due to these like toileting needs. Around the February time, we then had, you know, the enuresis mats, which are moisture detection mats. They were installed pretty much as soon as this person moved in. And that then enabled us to see on the devices like alerts that were triggered due to this. So it meant that we only needed to go in and check and support as and when it was actually required. So this person was then able to live a much better life, you know, their well-being, not intrusive checks. Like you can just tell in the way that she is now that she's a lot happier, a lot healthier. It obviously gave us the data that we needed to say what times roughly, like the enuresis mat was triggered and alerted. So even then we could take that even further to mean around about the same time every night they might need the physical checks, you know, that physical like support and assistance. But other than that, we can go on the enuresis alerts to ensure they have a full and healthy night's sleep. The second person I'm going to refer to, they had a history of falls and they needed like regular one-to-one at night time. And again, this person straight away is like, I don't want checks at night. You know, this person wasn't really used to having any sort of staff support living in the hospital environment. So the bed centre was really effective for this individual, especially being at risk of falls. You know, the bed sensor to alert us when they are up and out of bed, you know, if they were to enter the bathroom or, you know, any of the other rooms, the living room, the kitchen, we could then see that. And obviously it sends an alert. So if it's more than 10 minutes, then that'll obviously tell us that we'd need to go and respond to this, that there might be an issue. But other than that, obviously this person is now able to have a great night's sleep, and not being disturbed is so important for this person. Similarly, the third tenant that I'm going to refer to, they have a lot of difficulty sort of maintaining, you know, consistent sleeping patterns. A lot of that is like behavioural, and it's in terms of like diagnosis, as we referred to, you know, like self-harming risk behaviours. So obviously the bed sensor and the sound sensor is really effective for this individual. So we can sort of see if there's been any phone use, you know, there might be conversations over the phone, where they might be seeking additional support. And that really is really helpful for us to ensure that obviously we're not going in and checking too often, but we're being responsive for the times that when it's needed. And this really does encourage a better sleeping routine for this individual. And did you want to talk about the CCTV element as well, or?
Yeah, I was just going to mention that the second tenant who had lots of falls in hospital, the reason why they were falling was they just weren't getting the physical exercise. You know, they were going out maybe once, twice a week in the community. So they'd been in hospital over 10 years. Their mobility had really deteriorated, their muscle wastage had deteriorated, so they were having lots of falls in the community. Not lots, but they were falling in the community. And at the time when we were planning this person's discharge, the hospital were really adamant that we needed to have CCTV cameras to watch to make sure that when he was in his bungalow that he hadn't had a fall. And we really used just roaming to help us kind of work through that risk and actually think there's other ways to do this. That's actually really invasive. We don't want to replicate a hospital setting in the community. This person really values their time on their own. They don't want to be over supported. There are times when they really want to engage with staff, but that's often around things that they want. So like to get a meal or to go out into the community, but they don't necessarily want staff there just to watch them. Who does? So we really sort of and it wasn't easy conversations with just roaming, because you know you get to the point in discharge planning where you're kind of so exhausted about talking about the risks, you just kind of want to reach for the solutions that the hospital are giving you. But just roaming really helped us think about a different way of managing that risk, and it was really, really valuable. And I'm really glad that we didn't kind of just go for that easy option or that really restrictive option. We really challenged the way, because I think it's improved this tenant's life. Yeah. Thanks, Katie. Sorry.
So I think this part it's really important and shows, you know, a lot of understanding really what we sort of was able to pick up from particularly the manager's dashboard when we sort of looked into that. We noticed from the data there was significant periods of inactivity for one person that we support. This was when staff had left the property. So obviously this is something without the tech, we probably wouldn't have been aware of this, maybe not for a really long time. But thankfully we was able to look at this and we could see that there was these periods of times where, you know, they were on independence time, we're able to see that this person was inactive, and they weren't really attending to sort of any of their own needs during this time period. So this really indicated, you know, continuation of, you know, the anxious trauma response around being left unsupported around these times. So we were able to then pick up on this response. We're able to sort of analyze the data, look at what times this person was just inactive, not sort of doing anything in this time period. So then we were able to act on this and raise it with social workers, look at getting, you know, community nurse help, look at whether we need like further psychology around this, you know, because it's based on like a trauma response. Also able to get more involvement like with the PBS team based on this data to look, you know, what sort of interventions we can do from this sort of moving forward so that they can feel safer in their own environment, whilst also sort of ensuring that they're having those periods of independence, but looking what else we can do to sort of improve their quality of life during this time. Such as, you know, engaging in activities that's enjoyed, looking at plans in further depth. But it really was so useful to be able to quickly get hold of that data based on sort of the manager's dashboard, see, to improve this person's life. Yeah.
Thanks,
So
Katie.
next slide.
I was going to
Thank
say
you.
that we got, yeah, we wrapped up there. Brilliant. Oh, thank you for that, everyone. It's a really great story, isn't it? And I know from the team and their response to the outcomes that have been achieved at the Willows that it's inspiring us to continue this kind of work, and I'm sure it's going to inspire other people on the call today. We have quite a few questions that have come through, so if Kate, Anne and Mark want to pop back on, I think we can just run through some of those now. We've got a couple of comments around how good it is to hear the PBS approach being used. A couple of specialists on the call today, and I think there's just a few comments around what that looks like and how that operates around it not being a management of behaviour, but more around understanding and preventing the person so that it doesn't lead to those behaviours that concern other people. And around observation, functional analysis, that kind of thing. And I'm not sure there's necessarily a question to that, but it's more around active support and how that is also useful as well as being a whole organisational approach. So we're going to put the question and answers written out after this session. So we'll include those comments in there so everybody can see those as well. There's one question.
Come in,
Yeah,
Amy, and apologise to all the PBS practitioners who had to sit through my painful explanation of PBS, because you know, it's a complex area of work, but it is fundamental to kind of, I guess, the approach at the Willows, and it can't really be understated. I don't think that you can have the outcomes that we've had without that PBS. And I think the last example Katie referred to is kind of that in action, really. You know, that person, we saw a trauma response when staff left that person, and they were, you know, we've got flight, freeze, and we saw a freeze response for that person when they were left unsupported. And you know, if you left that unchecked over periods of time, that person's mental health could significantly deteriorate. They could end up back in hospital, which is the worst case scenario. So that, I guess, is, you know, the tech enables us to see that person and see their function, and then think, actually, how can we better support this person and prevent a further deterioration in their mental health? So I think that last example hopefully kind of neatly helps us to understand how the tech interacts with the PBS model at the service.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I think that's right. Thanks. And we have a couple of questions around devices specifically. So we've got, I think Katie probably answered it around the falls one actually, but we've had a question around devices specifically detecting seizures and detecting falls. And if so, what do we use? Well, I'll answer that initially, and then I think if anybody wants to chip in, they can join into that. With just roaming, our aim really is to identify what is the specific event that we're looking for, and then we'll find the technology around that will support that particular event and alerting to that particular thing. So we do use epilepsy devices. We use ones that that you would kind of know as routine ones on the market. And the same with fall sensors, but it might be that actually that's not really what we're looking for. What we're looking for is precursor behavior. What we're looking for is sound detection. So perhaps it's about movement. Perhaps we'll look around the whole thing. And I think for us, about as Anne and others have described, using that data, and Mark's mentioned it as well, to understand the root causes of that situation. And if you can use that information to understand the why it's happening, then actually we can be alerting to that thing. So it might not be a specific sensor that has been determined for a particular event. It might be a combination of sensors that will tell us the activity and the behavior that we need to see in order to respond to that accordingly. And then obviously we can track that through the course of time. If we know that we're looking for a particular event, it might be, we obviously talked about a case where we noticed absence of activity. It might be pacing behavior. It might be a lot of activity throughout every single room. It might be that kind of thing. It might be around noise. It might be around being in particular areas. But we're also looking for those things so that we can respond to that, and then we can pick up from that if that event happens again, and we can alert to that specific event and tell staff that they need to respond to that. And then they can also track the occasions of that throughout the time as well and make sure that we're responding accordingly. So hopefully that answers the epilepsy and the fall detection one. If anybody's got anything to add to that, feel free to chip in. Brill. And then this might be one for Anne. Did you fund the adaptations from Section 117 funding or NHS Capital, or through Lifeways getting grants?
So the build was so the actual build of the units was NHS England Capital that we applied for a long time before the actual build was done. There was significant delays to receiving the capital. COVID happened, and as you can imagine, there was delays. So the majority of the build was funded through NHS England Capital. The County Council put in a small amount of capital, and the housing provider put in some capital as well. But yeah, we're really lucky. It is not easy to purchase purpose-built, kind of enhanced, robust, capable environments. No one understands that better than me. And NHS England Capital was really kind of vital in enabling us to build that kind of environment, because of course, we are very lucky at the Willows that actually that environment manages some of the risks, not all of the risks. You can't manage all risks, but some of the risks in that it's a lot of the walls are curved. There's not sharp edges. There's people at that service who will seek sharp edges to self-harm, and the environment manages some of those risks, and that enables us to allow people more time unsupported. Absolutely. So it's really important to develop capable environments, and totally understand that, but I don't think we could have necessarily achieved that without that capital, actually.
Yeah, brilliant. This may have been answered already, but it's around cost benefit analysis. How are we evidencing that cost saving? I think Mark's already explained that saving that he mentioned, which was the 479, included all of the technology costs. Anything to add there, Mark?
No, yeah, just to reiterate, it is a net figure, so that we've taken off the cost of deploying the the just roaming system. It does have an ongoing cost, but that's, as I say, that's the full year equivalent. Saving, it'd be lovely if it was all for social care, but we've had to share it with our lovely colleagues at the NHS as well, because as I said, the packages are jointly funded. So that is the whole of the saving across NHS and social care.
Excellent. And I think that's one of the hardest things, isn't it, around preventative models, is that, I mean, we might come to this a little bit later, but we did have a question prior to the session around procurement rules and procurement models and what that looks like. Maybe I'll bring that back when everybody's on board later, and we can, I'm sure Julie will have something to say about that, so we'll come back to that in a bit. The next question is, what's our view or your view on health-based tech such as telehealth, which seems to be really intrusive, requiring robust governance? Well, our view when setting up technology is that the assessment process and the review process will be about finding the least restrictive option. So from our perspective, and I'm sure Anne and Mark and Katie will agree, if what you're suggesting in terms of introducing technology is more restrictive for a person, then it's not suitable for them. So in very broad terms, I think that's probably the attitude and the viewpoint that's taken on it. But if anybody's got anything to add to that.
No, I would endorse that. I mean, I say management of risk is a tricky area. You know, we like to think sometimes it's sort of an objective process, but there's a huge amount of subjectivity that's applied to risk assessments. But I think if you hold at the core of that assessment what's least restrictive as well, then you're likely to be headed in the right direction. And I think sometimes it's a simple point to make, but I think sometimes we forget to kind of almost lob that into our severity times likelihood analysis, you know. So definitely adopt that as a principle, what's least restrictive, and then hopefully you'll be there or thereabouts.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not saying we get it right all the time, but by the way, that's certainly not on this webinar to claim that we're perfect, you know. And there's been a lot of learning, I think, for us as a council at the Willows, and you know, having people like Anne and some of the staff that have worked at Lifeways that have been a bit challenging sometimes with us and with others has helped us to, you know, I think, to make the right decisions around risk management here.
Yeah. How do we manage alerts? As a question come up, do you use an ARC? Katie, do you want to chip in on that?
So how do we manage alerts?
Sorry, you probably might not know that reference. So I think what the person's asking, that's probably from a more of a technical background potentially, is that some systems, especially I would say traditional kind of telecare systems, would send an alert that is raised in a property, maybe from a door sensor or something like that, and it would trigger, and then it would send it out externally for somebody to pick that up in an alarm receiving center. But that's not the setup in this scenario. This is about a team that are on site, that are available to support the person, and they will receive the alerts through a handset, and that will be coordinated based on their support needs and the priorities across the service. But the support is available to them as and when they require it. But it's about affording people the opportunities to have time and space when they need it. And sometimes we're the problem. I think Mark said that earlier. Sometimes us being in people's space is the issue. So actually we need not to be, but how do we do that in a safe way? And how do we take steps back without whilst we mitigate those risks? So was there anybody else that wanted to say anything on that?
Well, just to add on to that, Amy, because obviously some people will be on the call that have got more dispersed type arrangements. This is a compact development, as Amy and Katie said, with the staff on site. But if you had a more dispersed model of support in a geographic area, then, well, Amy can talk about that, but there's the possibilities of using the system in that scenario as well.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. So we've got actually I'm trying to field questions for ones that would work maybe for everybody else. If we bring Julie and Katie Thorne back in now, I think some of these questions we can answer across the board. Hello, welcome back. So Julie, this is your first appearance. So you if you want to give us a quick intro to yourself and some of the work you've been doing, and then we're going to move into some of our panel discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. Good morning, everybody. So I'm the admission avoidance lead for Cornwall Partnership Trust. I'm a nurse by profession, and I'm currently working in an operations role, but I'm sort of mixing it up a bit. So I am maintaining my patient contact. I think that my particular interest is in the frail and elderly. In community hospitals, we have quite a few in Cornwall, most recently in a community assessment and treatment unit, which was developed during the CATU and offering sort of short treatments, short inpatient stays of about 3 days. If we can do that, which we do. So over the last year, I guess in Cornwall, we've been trying to move and sort of do that transition from pandemic kind of created virtual ward and CATU, which is the community assessment and treatment unit, into a more sort of 2024 model, whereby we're trying to open the same day emergency care units that are required and suggested by NHS England, and linking that to the virtual ward as well. So we've opened up some SDECs. We are developing our virtual ward, and we're using these tools for our admission avoidance, linking into our community teams and trying to do some sort of step up work and prevent that emergency appearance and conveyance at the acute setting. On a personal note, and in this role, I feel very strongly that actually digital technology is really important. I think that it's an alternative, and I think a complement to what we're already doing as carers. I don't see it as something that we want to replace the care provision or support of our volunteer sector, but I think it's a really good tool, as we've already heard this morning, to support the work that we're doing. So I'm a great believer that we can use more technology and work differently.
Thanks, Julie. So if we bring everybody back in now, we're going to run through some of our panel questions, and then we've had a very lively Q&A sessions chat function. So we will answer as many of those as we can today. And if we can't, then we're going to get the panelists to answer those questions, and we'll share them around in the Q&A at the end. So sticking with you first, Julie, then for our first question. We've talked a lot about risk today, and I know from experience you always say that the first thing that people always ask when introducing technology is it safe? And so I guess really just thoughts from everyone around how you mitigate and manage that risk. How do we move from a position of worry really and fear around making those changes, and how do we support that process when we're implementing technology?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's an issue that comes up a lot, so I can understand the question. I mean, one of the things to say is that sometimes you can try things out without, you don't have to remove support, for example, on the basis of put the tech solution in. Put the tech solution, taste and try, see whether it works, see whether it is producing the outcomes that you want. If you're not confident in it, then, which sometimes we're not confident in things, so well, let's try it. Just give it a try, see what happens. But it's a big issue, I think, particularly for support staff, and that's one of the things with this service, because obviously just Roaming have done a lot of work with the support staff at Lifeways to explain the system. Lobbing equipment in and not doing work with the staff is not a good idea. So you have to build up confidence. You have to, and the best way of doing that is to is case studies. I mean, that's one thing. If you've got historic evidence of it, then obviously you can give case studies and say, well, we've used that in this situation. But if you haven't got that, if you're starting afresh, then my advice would be taste and try. Don't, you know, see what happens, and then when you're confident, then you can implement the changes that in terms of less restrictive practice.
Thanks, Mark. Julie, should we go to you?
Yeah, so it's not safe is a sort of comment that's bandied around, and I think families feel that pressure. I think then professionals feel that pressure as well. I think that when we think of supporting people in their own home, which is what we're trying to do now nationally, it's our perceived risks, and that prevents us sometimes from supporting people and giving them freedom. And funnily enough, I think that then increases the risks. So for example, if somebody is at high falls of risks, for example, in my world, we might have a preventative approach in the support that we provide, and they might actually be prevented from living at home. And I think that if you're in a hospital setting, for example, and you feel that it's not safe for somebody to go home, you are then holding them in an environment that might have bigger risks. And I think that's one of the things that actually we need to think about. And so it's whose risk, who's making the decision here. And it does go with our sort of assessment of people's ability to understand risk in their own home and how they want to sort of manage that risk. So actually it's really strange, but I do see technology such as sensors being part of that mitigation tool against risk, and therefore, you know, to a certain extent, we need to be a little bit braver with what we're offering, and then we talk to the people that are involved and the people who are important to them, and then I think we have a different discussion about risk. I think technology complementing what we can offer actually can sort of free us up and make us less bound by our traditional kind of approaches to supporting people at home. So yeah, I think that it's whose risk, and actually let's try and be a little bit braver and empower our people to go home, knowing that actually we've got something more than we would traditionally have. So care package plus sensors plus a companion, for example, actually I think would make it more safe, and it wouldn't make it more risky to use technology in that sense. We're not replacing the human. We're actually supporting our care providers and our volunteer sector to do something different.
Brilliant.
And that risk of the, you know, what's the risk if you don't deploy tech would be the question I would emphasize. And actually, if we didn't use tech here, and it's not just the tech, I'm not going to sit here and say that tech was the be all and end all. You know, we've got a great provider here. The PBS has been absolutely essential to this. But if we didn't deploy the tech here, we would now have a group of people who have got much more restrictions on their life, won't have realised some of the things that they're capable of doing. Some of whom, you know, I've had the privilege of talking to some of the people that live at the Willows, and you know, their lives have been transformed. I mean, it genuinely did reduce me to tears when I've talked to some of the people here to hear the improvement in the quality of their lives. So if we hadn't done the tech, and yes, all the other things are important as well, but you know, that's awful. What an awful outcome that would have been for the people that are living here. So please think about what are the risks of not using tech, as well as what are the risks of using it.
Yeah,
I think we also assume that people want people to support them all the time, and actually people sometimes are not safe. People are sometimes at risk from other people. So if we think about some of the people who we're working with at the Willows, actually staff going in could make it worse, and actually could put themselves at risk of someone's distress or frustration that they're being, you know, overly supported. I think it's real assumption, particularly in learning disabilities, that people want lots and lots of support, that does make them feel safe. And I don't think that assumption is necessarily based on what what the people that we're working with truly believe. I think that they understand that sometimes it is better to have the right to feel safe in their own home without other people being there to make them feel safe. So particularly in learning disabilities, I think we mustn't assume that people want other people to support them all the time. That isn't my experience.
Yeah, and I think Charlotte reiterated that really in the video. Just to confirm, we're going to send it around afterwards, just because of timings and other things today. But please, can I urge you to watch it, because it is the voice of people there, and it just summarises really the success that they've had there. So we'll send that around straight afterwards today. Is there anybody else that wants to add to that bit, or shall I move on to the next? Brilliant, thank you. So this comes up quite a lot, and I think it's quite a complicated question really. I mentioned earlier we had a question through to us before the event, and I think it's one that comes up very regularly, is how are we commissioning the right technology for complex things? And also there's a question there in terms of barriers, isn't there? Procurement rules, funding, all of the questions that come up around that. And then I think we touched on it earlier around the fact that actually we're in a situation here potentially where we're preventing escalation, or preventing and avoiding undue costs around care and support, but it might not actually be the service who is funding that technology or that preventative work who's actually then recouping the financial reward. So I think there's probably a lot within that. So let's just start with how do we commission that right technology? How did it happen for you? And maybe we've got some guidance on how to help other people through that process.
Okay, that sounds like partly a question for me.
Yeah.
in terms of the willows. So yeah, I mean, obviously financial regulations, procurement rules, we don't have any option. We have to comply with those, and you know, it feels troublesome and a bit of a pain sometimes, but that's the way of the world. So the way I mean, what's happened at the Willows basically is we've actually got a like a sort of managed service delivery partner contract with another tech service provider. So in effect, we've actually commissioned this through them, and then they've gone to just checking, just roaming to put the service in. So that means we don't need to worry too much, because it's obviously covered by a contract that's been out through a competitive process. So yes, many of you may already have those types of contracts if you're on the call, but if you're not, you know, it's a good idea to to think about procuring. I think Katie alluded to this earlier. You know, it's a good idea to procure a service that's equipment agnostic. You know, that's you've got some clauses in there that enable you to get equipment that maybe that some of the standard tech providers that are out there in the market might be a bit more restrictive, and say, well, you know, you need to buy the stuff that we do, not other stuff that other organizations do, you know. And there are plenty of organizations out there that will offer that type of contract. So that would be my main piece of advice, I think.
Thanks, Mark. That's perfect. Anything to add to that, Julie? Is there anything that you've come across that would?
Yeah, I think that as a professional, you often want something now, and you know, you want to be able to use something. And I think that I understand those sort of, you know, pathways that create the description for commissioners and funding streams. And I think that sometimes pathways and sort of initiatives funded in a certain way can then lead to kind of difficulties when we then want to use something in a different way, or we want to introduce a new service. And I'm not necessarily from the commissioners, but you know, when we've been allocated funding for a certain element and then you want to use it for something else, that sort of freedom to use the funding, that freedom to introduce new services when the funding element and question in the room is important, can be a frustrating it's difficult to find the right words, isn't it? You know, it can just be frustrating when you're trying to implement something quickly. I'm not saying that processes aren't quick, but there are always lots of things to consider. And, you know, with a piece of technology that I would like to use, the world of cybersecurity is introduced into that sort of process, and that, you know, it demands a lot of time and money in itself for companies to invest in, to make sure that they are compliant with the processes and the opportunities we have for the people that we're looking after. So I think that, you know, we all understand why processes need to be, you know, completed. But I think that, you know, that frustration as a professional, when you're in front of somebody, you think, oh, I'd really like to do this, and I really think I can help this person. I think, you know, that could be a challenge, which I think that we're all familiar with. But I think it's been able to get the right support for evaluation as well. Of the services that we want. I think that's really important, that we link into sort of national initiatives as well for evaluation, and sort of try not to double up and duplicate, but actually try and use what's already there as good practice and an example. So this sort of thing's really good.
Yeah, perfect. And we've had a question about could technology specifically be funded through individual care packages? And yeah, we've seen individual service funds, direct payments, it being part of that picture, but we've also seen it funded through housing benefit. So I think it's about being creative with the models that exist, as you said. And actually, Anne made a point on the run up to this around, you know, are we going to not do it because that's not in my budget? I don't think so, because we can see that the outcomes are worthwhile. And if someone else has benefited, great financially, but actually it's about how the person's benefited, isn't it? Rather than the frustrations around budgets and what that looks like.
I think could I just add as well that, you know, as we sort of try to move towards more integrated services and, you know, have integrated care boards, it's having, I think as well, strategies for things like technology that are integrated, that actually do give that joined up support to what we're trying to do, because it never affects one group of people. If I'm working for the NHS, for example, I am going to be working closely with my colleagues from adult social care and colleagues from the volunteer sector and private organisations. And I think that actually an integrated approach for this in 2024, because I think that this is the start really of how we're using technology for our people in their own homes. So I think at the start of this journey, I would encourage anybody who is commissioning or thinking of a strategy that we make it as integrated as possible, so that we can be open to developments in a much more sort of streamlined way, I think is what I would ask for.
Yeah, definitely. There's lots of questions in the chat. I'm going to try and answer some of them, because I think it's probably more important to do that than to follow our own agenda at this point. So there is a question around sustainability. How sustainable is the model? Can you scale this up? So maybe if we start with that one, just to kind of, I think Mark touched on the point earlier, but this is a specific service where we're supporting people that are on the same site, but actually the possibilities in terms of capability of the technology is potentially supporting people in the community as well in this way. So there's that point to add. But in terms of sustainability and scaling up, is it possible?
Well, if you can demonstrate there's a return on investment, then I would like to think that your colleagues that hold the purse strings will agree that that's a sustainable model, and we can absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, demonstrate here that there is a return on that investment. So, you know, outcomes are really important. This is not just about slash and burn. You know, those of you that see the video later will see me get wax lyrical about the win-win scenario, but you know, that's what we've got to aim for, isn't it? We have to aim for the win-win, that we're maintaining or better still improving outcomes for people, but we're managing to do that within, unfortunately, the tight financial circumstances in which we all have to operate at the moment. So yes, absolutely, this is sustainable because it more pays for itself multiple times over. So that's yeah. Is it scalable? you know, it'd be nice to say, yeah, that's really easy to do. You know, we haven't talked much about the kind of cultural shift, the cultural challenges in this space. So yes, in theory, it's all highly scalable. But the reason it's worked here is because we've had a cohort of people, you know, some of our own staff, the staff at Lifeways, the people themselves who are living at the service, you know, who've been willing to go on that that journey. But I certainly wouldn't want to underestimate the potential scale of the cultural shift that's required across health, social care, the provider sector to maintain delivering that at scale. And I think ultimately that is the challenge for all of us, is that cultural shift around attitudes to risk, attitudes to whether tech is or isn't a suitable solution. But I'd like to think the Willows is an example of that, how that has worked.
Definitely. And yeah, from experience, we're seeing, sorry Anne, just really quickly, we're seeing it across local authorities, Newcastle being an example where a lot of this is around models of housing as well. And I know people have mentioned houses of multiple occupancy and what that looks like in care homes. Absolutely, there's applications in those settings. I think this particular model of housing is most suitable for it because we're using a person's individual situation and their data to understand their patterns. So it's much easier to do that in a single occupancy dwelling. But there's definitely other applications. Over to you, Anne. Sorry.
I was just going to say that I think that it is scalable. I think it absolutely evidences efficiencies, but I think we can't lose sight of that fundamental principle when we think about where we started this journey was with PBS and improving the quality of people's lives. And we won't improve the quality of people's lives if we do cut and burn the hours that those people receive. You know, every hour we save at night when someone's asleep, we can invest in someone's daytime to make sure that they're doing really, really positive things. And in learning disability services, where we are using PBS models, we really need to make sure that we are maintaining people's quality of life. So getting that balance is really, really critical. I don't believe that people should be overly supported. I don't believe people want that, but I do believe people need to have support to maximise their daytime opportunities and their quality of life. And I think we have to be careful as commissioners not to be too greedy and think about investing in quality of life, particularly in learning disability services.
Yeah, definitely. We might have time for one more question. I think if we point this towards Katie Thorne initially, because there's a few that have come in around AI and what that looks like as part of tech solutions. Yeah, so in terms of using AI, we use algorithms. So it depends on your viewpoint of what AI is. So there'll be things that we draw out. So we'll look for patterns, we'll identify things, and we will point towards things. But our position as Just Checking has always been that that data needs a human eye, that actually that technology can take us so far, and actually we need to combine that with people's experience and knowledge in order to map out the data that people really need to see and what that looks like. Katie Thorne's doing a lot of work with generative AI in terms of the legalities and the ethics of such. And yeah, there's a statement that's been made around advocating for AI, but actually in our landscape at the moment there are ethical issues that we need to work through, and Katie's the project that she's involved in with that will probably answer some of those, if you want to take that, Katie.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. Yes, I'm very positive about AI, I should say, in the first instance, but yeah, really sort of think that there's quite a lot of ethical considerations, particularly around generative AI, that we need to be thinking through as a sector. So the work we're doing with the Institute of Ethics and AI at Oxford University, where LGA and ADAS are also involved, as well as sort of care provider organisations and people with lived experience of services, is all around sort of developing a principles framework for how you go about choosing what generative AI would look like in a service and whether it's right for individuals. And really sort of the overarching principle of that is any position where there's decision about somebody's care and support has to be made by a human, it has to be made by a person. A lot of the benefits of AI are going to be around sort of administrative sort of functions, I think, for Gen AI. I think there was a really interesting question in the chat, and it's one I'm definitely going to take away because I don't have an answer for it. Is there any opportunities for technology to support people to assess their own concept of risk and to really make that decision for themselves, which I think is an absolutely fascinating question, and I wish I had the answer. I do think there's potential that generative AI might be really useful here. We're already seeing chatbots being developed, for example, for care workers to help support them with access to information around sort of approved policies for how to deal with certain situations, around different clinical pathways, to be used as a decision-making tool, not to make that decision for people. So I think there's definitely some opportunity there. But yeah, if you go to our website, you can find out a lot more information. Quite conscious of time, Amy.
Yeah, I know, as am I. We're right on the nail now. If we'll close this when everybody wants to leave, essentially, but we're not going to have time to run through all the questions that we've had. It's been a really good response. Thank you for that, and apologies if we haven't got around to your question now. What we will do is we will share that with everybody in the group and everybody that's been a panelist and get their responses for that, so we can get that written and we can get that sent around alongside the video. Any further questions after this session, point them towards us. We're going to be reaching out and giving you contacts of how you can get in touch. But, you know, hopefully this has been really inspirational. And I think we probably could have done this for 3 or 4 hours. We could have kept going. Yeah, the key things I'm taking away from today is perhaps being a little bit more brave, and that word's been mentioned a few times, around risk and what that looks like. And maybe, I think I nicked this from Anne, she said this a while back, not focusing on all the reasons not to do something, because that's going to be the difference between making change and not making change, which is an absolutely wonderful point. And I think getting the environment right people has been really clear, and that is a combination of, you know, we can't take all the credit being the technology provider. That's been a combination of the staff support and the support that Katie and her team have given staff in how to create that model, what that looks like. They're following the right course of action for each individual that lives there, and having the right housing that has supported this model, and being able to then therefore give people the time and space that they want and need, and privacy in their own home with those massively reduced restrictions. So for me, it's that creating the right environment is the win-win situation, as we've talked about, isn't it? So thank you to everyone for your time today. Keep pushing questions through, and we will be answering them over the course of the next few days to make sure that everybody's got those answered. Thank you for your time. Take care.